All right, guys, we're back with our podcast, and we have a special treat today. We're going to be interviewing Captain John Ensign of the Marine Corps. He's a veteran, and he's going to be logging in any second now to our live video. And it's a real treat for me, so we'll go ahead and, John, if you want to go ahead and request to get in here. Okay, here, just give me a second. We're going to have John, having him log in. We've had some technical difficulties, but I think should be good now. Hey, John.
What's up, dude? How's it going?
Good. All right, guys. So you're in for a treat today. I have my best friend from college, John Ensign, has agreed to do an interview with me today. But it's really neat. John has a really cool history, and you can see at the title, he is a veteran of the Marine Corps. And so as we start out in this podcast, I'm just going to have John, give me just a brief kind of cursory view. You graduated at Asbury in 2009. What did you do after you graduated, and how did you get to the point where you're at right now?
Well, so what's the context of this guy? Are we being on?
So basically,
are we being our goofy selves, or are we?
No. We'll be our goofy selves. We'll just let that happen organically. What I want is for the viewers and the listeners to know basically, and again, we won't go too in depth. Just basically, what did you do after college? How long did you do it, specifically in the Marine Corps? And where are you at now? And just a little bit about your background post college in 2009.
Yeah. Well, graduated. Went in the Marine Corps straight away, and then went in as an infantry officer. So did the whole pipeline, and then found myself with 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines out in Camp Pendleton, and then then deployed over. Just did a single deployment to Afghanistan, and if any veterans were to see this in terms of combat infantry, as one deployment is nothing. I mean, by the comparison of especially the senior NCOs and staff NCOs when I was in the fleet in the Marine Corps. I mean, my platoon, a good example, my platoon sergeant in the Marine Corps had 7 deployments, when I first got there. So like a single deployment overseas, by comparison to a lot of veterans, people look at it and they're like, it's like one combat deployment is nothing compared to the vast majority of, especially the NCO, staff NCOs, and a lot of the senior, the time that I was in, captains or such. So found myself in the military for about 4 years. And then after that it was a road all over the place, man. Just enjoyed, went out to the East Coast in Williamsburg, Virginia, hung out with my older brother for a while, and just worked at a road bike shop, coached CrossFit for a little bit, went down and studied at Southern Seminary for a couple of years. Went back up to Indianapolis, and then was in auto detailing for a few months, coached CrossFit again, bounced around, got married, went out to North Carolina, lived out there for about 5 years, had a great time out near Raleigh, just working in the utility industry, and super your standard extremely toxic corporate culture, which the vast majority of Americans are stuck in it, and just learned how to navigate that. Ended up back here in the Midwest again, and so just bounced around a bunch, man. It's been a ton of fun.
So you have 3 kids, and you're in the grand scheme of things, your time in the military has been about a quarter of your life post college, right? From where you're at now?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So one of the things I want to talk to John about, guys, is getting his perspective, because one of the things that, I'm not going to flesh out right now, but John, he's not going to toot his own horn. He's someone who's extremely genuine. He's going to be authentic. Sometimes I have to pull out things out of him. So this will be my intent, is to pull some things out of him, even if it makes him a little uncomfortable talking about himself. But you're going to be talking about yourself, John. So just get used to the interview talking about yourself. All right. So we find ourselves today in a quandary, a quagmire in our foreign policy. It seems to me it's interesting how the narrative is kind of flipped in certain ways from like the 1960s and 70s, where you would think, being on the left side, the progressive side, was very anti-war, opposing Vietnam. To the flip, you just see a political shift to more of the conservative MAGA side of the aisle, being very opposed to interventionism, foreign conflicts. And so I guess kind of setting the stage, specifically, what have you seen right now in America specifically with our foreign policy that is a shift, even when you were in the Marine Corps, 15 years ago? How is that? How is I guess the better way to put it is, how have you seen the evolution of our country, where it's at right now, specifically the leadership with the Trump administration, and how that is really deviated from kind of the military industrial war complex we've seen throughout, a lot of our history?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad question, and there's so many nuances. I mean, a good example would be is when you read. One of the things that I wanted to do with having had the experience in Afghanistan that I did is I wanted to read a book even on the back end. Now it's a shame that this wasn't this book should have been. I don't even know if it had been written prior to that, but it's called Games Without Rules, and it's about Afghanistan, and it just kind of goes into the nuance of kind of Afghanistan itself, right? A place that had a lot of interventionism taking place inside of it. You can run that all the way back to the ancient world if you want to go back to Alexander and the Persians and stuff like that, but or even further back into the Bronze Age, if you want to talk about, Afghanistan being a primary exporter of tin during the Bronze Age. So all that to be said, I wanted to learn and study about it. And the reason I bring all that up in relation to your question about geopolitical landscapes and the United States' influence into it is, in that one book, when it kind of talks about some of the intricacies in the relationships that took place between even something like Afghanistan and Pakistan and these other, like, the small detailed nuances of the sociological, the political, the economic, all the small factors that are going into influencing these, it's so detailed and so in depth. And the reason I go into saying all of that is, when we look at geopolitics, especially as it's playing out now, there are so many details and nuances that are taking place that we just simply are never going to know. And so the reason I say that is I want to be very careful not to speak with certainty, right, on everything, in terms of, like, the fact of the matter is that, I don't know, you know what I mean? And I think it's important to acknowledge that up front, that it's like, why is, the current, geopolitical landscape that was pretty much established post World War II, and, the relationships and the coalitions and the treaties and everything that took place post World War II, why does it seem like there's, that is kind of, I don't want to say coming apart, because it's not like falling apart, right? But, relationships that were once considered to be solid bedrocks that would never change are starting to change, right? And little kind of views of how things are going to be approached and addressed is differing, to where it's like, hey, we aren't, it's not that we're no longer allies with France, or we're no longer allies with, United Kingdom and Great Britain. We're still allies with these people. However, the core kind of fundamental values, foundations that we may have been aligned on for a time, maybe just seem to be different. And so it's, as I kind of dig into it, and we dig into it, these are such nuanced topics that people will study for years and years and years to be able to have even just kind of a general capability to go into the details. So, the post-World War II, at least in the moment that we're living in, the post-World War II kind of structure is kind of coming apart, deteriorating itself. You could even also kind of talk about the post-Cold War structures as well. Kind of both of those themselves, I think, are kind of being shaken a little bit. And the biggest thing that I see that's changing, as a person who, was a part of the conflicts of the last 20 years, is proxy wars, right? Which all the new, The Ukraine conflict is nothing more than a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Or at least that's why it has lasted this long. And I think proxy wars are no longer, at least right now, I'm kind of rambled for no reason. I've just said a lot of words without saying anything, so I want to apologize to you.
No, that's not at all. No.
The proxy wars are not popular right now, pretty much is what I'm trying to say. And it's very unpopular with the current administration that's in right now. And I think that literally is kind of all that's happening, is that the current administration is not okay with fighting conflicts that at face value might not be serving what we consider to be a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
However, there may be underlying things that are taking place from geopolitical perspectives that we don't fully understand, that are having influences that are trying to achieve an ends that we don't know, are not really popular right now. And I think that that's kind of what's happening, is those geopolitical conflicts or proxy conflicts are kind of on the outs. And those proxy conflicts are highly profitable to certain people.
Let me ask you this. I did ask you a really open-ended question that, I mean, to be honest, we could spend hours and hours and hours fleshing this out, and especially you, because I think this, in many ways, when you put yourself in the crosshairs of, as they call it, the military-industrial war complex, that, I mean, the DoD gets, I think in this latest budget proposals, $1 trillion. And so you're talking about one of the great, maybe the greatest enterprise of any, business or governmental organization in the country. So there's tons of money being circulated through the Department of Defense. And that would be, I mean, just to deconstruct that would take a long time. But let me mention something, because I think this is tangentially related to exactly what you said. President Trump just wrapped up his visit to the Middle East, and his first visit was to Saudi Arabia, which, I would think they're a Middle Eastern ally, air quotes. I think there is certainly a symbiotic relationship with them. But, I've heard from different pundits that a speech President Trump gave was akin to Ronald Reagan telling Gorbachev to bring down the Berlin Wall. He said something, and I'm paraphrasing here. He said basically, America telling Middle Eastern countries what to do, how to govern themselves is over. You're perfectly capable of being able to govern yourselves, to run your countries. And that, to me, just him saying that, of course, he fleshed it out more in the speech, and I encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to look at it. That, to me, was such a deviation from maybe any president post-World War II, maybe post-Woodrow Wilson, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I'm a presidential historian by any means, but certainly a pivot, a drastic pivot from the military-industrial war complex that is insatiable in their lust for foreign conflict, because at the end of the day, it's about money. So my question is, when you hear President Trump saying something like that, and how that impacts our foreign policy doctrine, so to speak, like, how significant to you is that stance, if it holds to be true, which I certainly believe that President Trump, and I firmly believe he's taken that stance, and he's actually very much committed to that perspective, that doctrine. But let's just say if that is true, and that's America's posture under President Trump for the next 4 years, how significant is that in terms of just the polarization, especially how that is such a pivot from where America has been for decades and decades and decades, that specific statement and that doctrine, not just in the Middle East, but also anywhere?
Yeah, it's, I think that when history, I think, is a great humbler, right? And the reason I say that is if you study the history of the Middle East, right? If you study even the ancient history of the Persians, you consider the Babylonians, you consider the Assyrians, who, when the Assyrian army was built, and it was a machine unlike any other in the world at the time, and And you think about the descriptions that we have in ancient sources of places like Persepolis, and it was burned by Alexander and those guys, and during his campaigns, and it's just you think about the beauty of what the walls of ancient Babylon actually would have looked like, the Hanging Gardens. You think about the Persians and not just the beauty of the things that they built back then, but also the just the governance and the infrastructure that they were able to put into place, and even to run the Khwarezmian Empire, right? That was virtually destroyed by the Mongols during the Mongol invasions and stuff like that, and what Baghdad was like before it was destroyed by the Mongols. And the reason I say that is it's like, for a 250-year-old country like the United States, as great as it is, the greatest country in terms of, I would say, looking historically throughout history, for some people, not all, I get that. You could not pick a greater place and a greater time to live in the history of the world than has been, what is the United States in terms of peace, in terms of the quality of life for most, not all. Now, there are people 45 minutes away from me right now who live in squalor, right? I'm not naive to the reality that not all live in the same conditions. I appreciate that. But the reason I say all of that is for Donald Trump, or for President Trump, to say that it's not our place to tell the Middle East how to live and how to govern. These people have been living and governing at the highest levels for thousands of years, creating some of the most beautiful and intricate and amazing civilizations that the world's ever known. I mean, not just in beauty and in infrastructure, but in the details of politics and governance. And you think about the Persian Empire at its height before Alexander took it down, and Cyrus the Great, and then running through some of the leaders of the ancient world, and just some of the things that they were able to do, that they were able to establish, right? Like one of the great tragedies I see in the Middle East and today is the fact that Iran is now, as it is, so closed off, because what a rich place with such a rich history, with rich people who are brilliant and smart and capable. And now every single culture has its idiots. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a part of that's just reality of being a human being in the human race, right? There's always going to be that component, no matter what nation or civilization you have or a part of. So for Donald Trump to say that about the Middle East is just to acknowledge the obvious, which is, hey, like, the United States of America is powerful and is influential and is on the world stage as it is right now. Let's not be so arrogant as to consider the fact that people who have literally been doing what we call governing, now obviously that changes and shifts and moves and all that stuff, but to tell people like that, who for thousands of years have had civilizations across the board, that we are no longer going to tell them what to do, it's just it's like, wow, that's shining a magnifying glass on the arrogance and the pride of people who think that we should have been doing that, maybe in the first place. Or that we should have been doing it in a much more humble way. And that's just from a geopolitical community, or more of a political foreign policy posture, I guess would be the proper way to say it.
Well, it's interesting, and I love how you're infusing the history of the Middle East and how brilliant really that culture has been, and how in many ways how successful and wealthy that culture has been in that area around the world. I think that's enlightening, especially in terms of how many people's perception of the Middle East, especially when it's related to America, is that they have needed us to intervene to create stability. And I think the bottom line is, like, if you look just in the last 20 years, and if you look at whether it's been Benghazi in Libya, whether it's been in Afghanistan, or it's been in Iraq, Iraq, we're not going to go in there. Man, I got a crick in my throat. But whether it's been, those several countries I mentioned, we did not leave them in better shape after the fact than before we went in. And it doesn't take a military expert to look at that. And so if you're someone in the Middle East, you're thinking to yourself, like, yes, this promise of regime change, of going into a country and deposing a dictator, and then installing this form of governance that you choose as a American foreign policy, then you look at, like, the after effects. And it's like, well, the country's in worse shape after the fact than it was before.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and to me, it was that.
I'm sorry. No, I apologize for cutting you off. Keep going.
Yeah, no, and so to me, it's just like what I found so intriguing on the political landscape is that, and I've said this before on podcast and when I've talked, is one of the coolest things I think God's doing in the country and around the world is pulling back the veil and showing people, and even in the political realm, like who are the people that have really been running things and what do they really want and what's influencing them? Because oftentimes you thought, well, the Republicans were the ones who wanted to invade countries, and the Democrats were the ones who wanted to, or the Republicans were pro-military, Democrats were anti-military and anti-war. Republicans wanted to defend, the defenseless around the globe. And so there was this dichotomy, this perception, right, that the Republicans were the military party and the Democrats were the ones who didn't really like the military and were wanting to oppose any sort of intervention. What you've seen with President Trump and the doctrine he's presented the last 8 years, and when I say 8 years, he's been on the public stage the last 8 years, is you're seeing that it's really been, you call it the uniparty, the neocons, whatever, you're seeing that actually it's not really about the parties. It's about who's getting paid, who's getting some sort of advantage from promoting interventionism around the globe. Like, and I think it's as simple as that. Like, what does America benefit by, as you said, running a proxy war in Ukraine that's aiding and abetting more death? Same thing across the globe in different countries. What is America? What are the Americans? What are we actually benefiting? Because at the end of the day, it's like if you're a leader in America, your first responsibility should be to the people you govern. That's the first responsibility you have. Our responsibility is to our family. We can't start taking care of someone in a different state unless we take care of the people in our own house. That's our sole responsibility. So in a very similar way, it's interesting. So we're fighting for democracy. We're fighting to stop Putin. And I know the whole Ukraine thing, you could go on a tangent and we could talk about that for a long time. But my point is, when you pull back the layers and you see what is the common denominator, it's, well, if you look back at funding, if you look at financing, if you look at the politicians and where they're getting money, whether it's from defense contractors, you see that at the end of the day, it's not really the bill of goods they've sold us, that we're fighting for democracy. We're trying to defend the defenseless. Like, well, I find that ironic, because if that were true, you'd seal the border, you protect the people in your house, as opposed to trying to run a fake, phony enterprise around the world to make it seem like you're stopping Vladimir Putin from invading the West and establishing a neo-Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, man. That to me is, it really, you can simplify it, because then you see people like, what in the world does Liz Cheney and Kamala Harris have in common? What does Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney and Chuck Schumer have in common? Well, nothing really that you'd think, other than the fact, where's their money coming from? How are they getting financed? Who's supporting them? And it's really kind of a sickening reality when you pull back the layer and you see what these people who've supposedly been trustworthy leaders, and you actually understand, well, what is the rationale behind the decisions they're making, mm-hmm. especially in foreign policy, which has a complete nexus to domestic policy.
Yeah.
Anyway, man, yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts with that. I want to pivot from this here in about a minute, but I want to get your response.
Yeah, I've got kind of, if you want 60 seconds, I'll be brief.
No, you can get, it's longer than 60 seconds.
I've got two things that I would respond on that. And that, the first and foremost is, I would encourage anybody who wants to get a better understanding of kind of the idea of kind of American geopolitics in terms of kind of how there's a book, and I've talked to you about it before. It's called The New Confessions of an Economic Man. It's a great audiobook. if you want to do that. Now, you don't retain information. I don't think. Some people may. Some people may have that gift, but I don't. So I'm not going to apply that to everybody. But I think you get a lot more from books when you physically read them versus listening to them. However, there's great value in listening to them too. And I think that this book is very narrative. So you're able to pick up a lot as you're listening. And this individual, this guy virtually was, in essence, recruited in, almost kind of like you would consider like a clandestine asset to be, to be recruited and brought in. And virtually, in essence, what it does is it lays out and makes it, this book will help people have a lot better understanding of what when President Trump first came into office and they went after the AID, USAID, the Agency for International Development. This book will help make that. This book will help that agency make a lot more sense, because that is what this book talks about. The Americans would go into places that would have natural resources or something that they needed or wanted. They would not go in with people who are a part of the American governing system. These are going to be contractors who would go into these. This guy was working for a contracting company who would go in. They would promise significant benefits as a result of infrastructural projects, highways, bridges, things like that. They would get these people to sign off in these different countries. These countries then would be impoverished through debt that they would not be able to pay. The United States would then leverage that debt through the exploitation of this nation's resources or this nation's national or natural resources. This individual spent a lot of time in Central, South America, places like that, and also some other nations abroad. So that is the book I would recommend to everybody to kind of help give a little bit more sense to American geopolitics and how it plays out kind of behind the scenes when we don't see it, right? Because that's kind of a lot of the things that are taking place across the board. And if everything in that book is true, I don't know how that author that wrote it is still alive or was alive. I don't know how it was allowed to come to light. But all that to be said, the second thing I would say when you're talking about these individuals across the board, and I'll try to be really succinct on this, is when you look at politics, it's so in how people are acting and why they're doing it. It's like, what in the world are they, like, what? And it's got to come back to your worldview. It just does. It has to. That's the only way to make sense of it. And the reason I say that is if you are living your life where this life is all you have, then it makes sense why people would do what they do. If you believe from a narrative perspective of the past, the present, and the future, that if your very short time on this earth is all that there is, and then when your time expires, that's it. You can understand why the former President Biden, why he's still trying to be in the public scene at all. Like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, bro, like, I disagree with everything regarding, how you governed and everything regarding, your presidency and everything for the 40 years of your time in office leading up to it for the most part. But it's like, is a fellow human being. And I'm like, bro, like I don't want, like, you're a grown man. You'll choose what you want for yourself, but, just go and rest and spend time with people you care about. And, in your final years of, he's a very, obviously very elderly and now is not well. And I pray obviously that he would be well physically. But it's like, why are these people still doing this? Why are they flying the plane into the ground like this at this age? It's like, just go and sit on the beach, man. Like, look out at the ocean, chill, rest, relax. Like, enjoy this time that you have left, that all of us have left, I mean, and it's like, when you look at the world and this is all you got, and this is all you're going to live for, and you don't think about or consider, eternal ramifications and the reality of what life and what is past it. That is why you can see, and it makes sense of why people do what they do politically. It's like, dude, well, when all you're doing is trying to figure out how to make the biggest name for yourself or the biggest bang for your buck while you're alive, or, if everything that you're looking through is from a purview that's so short-sighted and so intertwined and just this small, it begins to make sense why things just get so stupid. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's kind of my 2 cents on those 2 points.
Yeah, good. We'll pivot a little bit because, foreign policy discussion, especially with your experience, and we could spend a whole segment on that, but I want to get some of your thoughts on just some hot takes
Mm.
right now, current event hot takes. So let's start. You just talked about Joe Biden, so I think that's a fair kind of transition.
Yeah.
So we heard recently that Joe Biden has been diagnosed with a very aggressive form of prostate cancer that's gotten into his bone. Um, we also know that, and I think people, even mainstream, the legacy mainstream media is admitting this, and that he had a dementia problem, that he obviously was mentally, cognitively impaired during his presidency. So that being said, we hear about his aggressive form of cancer. We have physicians who are saying, that you would have likely had this for 4 to 5 years because it's very slow and meticulous in its growth. So what is your take, John, on why you think, because I think this is interesting. I'll give my thoughts because I want to hear yours, but
Yeah.
why do you think all of this is coming out right now, specifically right now? What is your thought process and why we're hearing about this right now in the news?
Yeah, I mean the simple three-word answer is just I don't know, and that's not a hot take when you're talking with somebody.
What's your belief? What's your
Yeah, I mean,
instinct?
I mean this, this information. I don't know, man. It's like I don't know if it's something that they've known about for quite a while and they chose not to communicate it for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know if it serves any ends on their part to want to release it and allow this information to come to light right now.
Well, let me ask you this, because that was I kind of put you on the spot there. I know.
No,
Maybe I asked that because I have my own
I would
thoughts.
love to hear yours.
If this is, let me ask you this: if this is all true, if all of this is true, and they covered this up,
Yeah.
like how big of a cover up and how culpable are the people who cover? Because you have the media who covered this up, you have people in the administration who covered this up. So my thinking is, how severe and how much accountability should there be for those who covered it up, and what does this tell you about who was running the country?
Yeah, I think it answered your first question, and I'd be interested to know what you think, and also what your pushback is. I think you'll disagree with me on this. So if you do, I'd love to hear your perspective on the back end. I don't, I mean, there should be, from an accountability perspective, there should be, but there won't be. And that's unfortunate, I think. However, I just don't think there will be. But when it comes to, I think that I think that the most important thing to take away from this, right, is voting citizens of the United States. We have to not be short-sighted, and I think that that's the most important thing, right? And in 3 years, in 3.5 years, these are the types of things that you can't be forgotten. And I think that, and that's what matters, right? Is like, considering this when the next election cycle comes around and, whoever the nominees are and the people that are running, like not forgetting these types of things. So I think Americans, all of us, myself included, I think we have a tendency to be very short-sighted. And so I think that what this should be for every single individual voter is something that should always stick around in our minds of, hey, be wary and be wise and be discerning that you can of how deceptive people are willing to be. And so I think that number two, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, keep going.
No, number two, I think what this should say from a governing perspective is that the United States of America for the previous 4 years has been governed by completely unchecked lower level bureaucrats in the executive, specifically in the executive, not the judicial or legislative, but in the executive branch. There was literally a Lord of the Flies for the last 4 years, because obviously the former president was, and, man, dude, it's not like, I don't know. Mike, tell me what you think about this. Let me give it to you so you can run with it.
Okay.
I don't understand. Like, it's hard for me to fathom. Like, it's like, how are we even still talking about? I'm like, it was so obvious 4 years ago, 5 years ago, that the former president was not in a position to be in a high level, stressful leadership position. Like, it's not a political thing. It's not a mean or rude thing. It's, you know, I, it was so obvious. So it's like, why is this still even a conversation? Like, I guess if that makes any sense, I don't know if that just highlights the level of the deceptiveness that's taking place and the type of fight that's being had against that type of deception. But it's like, I can't understand why it's still a conversation, because I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I'm like, man, like he
Yeah.
that poor guy. That's literally all I thought. I thought,
Yeah.
that poor guy. That was literally the three words that I thought to myself.
Yeah. I mean, there's, I think, a lot of theories. I'll stick to what I think can be at least like circumstantially proven. Uh, Let me go back to the first point of why I think he's back on the center stage of the conversation. One of the things that I think is abundantly clear is
Mhm.
that the media, and you see this with any like totalitarian country, any dictatorial, tyrannical country, that if they can control the media, then you, in many ways, can control the masses. I think a great thing right now that's happening in culture is the information war that we're under. I think independent journalism is having a key role in people being awakened to truth and challenging the status quo, the perceived status quo of the mainstream media. But the mainstream media has been so used to, for decades and decades and decades, running and controlling the narrative, telling people this is the status quo, even when it's not. Like, you look at the electoral map, like the whole country's basically red, with the exception of some big cities around the country and then the West Coast and the East Coast. Everything's red. So you have groupthink in huge cities, and that's who the media speaks to. And so, but they try to dilute the message and tell us, here's what most people think, when in reality, look at the electoral map, that's what most people actually think, which is crazy, because the loudest voices oftentimes are the ones with the strongest pull. So that being said, anything coming out of the news, anything coming out of CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, the New York Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, I could list, 10 more, is very intentional. They're all coordinated because they're all owned by basically very similar people.
Mm-hmm.
Like the institutional investors like BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, they own tons of shares in these corporations, and they all have very similar messaging. If you look at, like, when they break stories, they all use the exact same language, the exact same lingo, the exact same narrative. So right now, with the cancer diagnosis with Biden, okay,
Mm-hmm.
when Morning Joe, who's one of the most extreme anti-Trump progressive talking heads out there, when they're putting on a well-known doctor who is, I think he was Rahm Emanuel, I believe, was the mayor of Chicago, which is like the epicenter of liberalism and
Mm-hmm.
leftist politics. I think it was his brother who was on Morning Joe, talking about how Joe Biden had to have known that he had cancer 5 years ago. So I'm thinking, if you have the far left is now telling us this, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, it's kind of like they're eating their own, which they do, I believe. But it's like, so my take is this: the greatest crime is how they all covered up the fact that he was mentally deficient. I mean, like, he was incoherent. He was not. He had dementia. That's just, like, you got to call a spade a spade. Any person looking at him can acknowledge the man had dementia. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
they all were very culpable in covering that up. Now, what I think is, and you're seeing, it's becoming abundantly clear. I don't know if you heard the Her tape that was released recently. This guy, whose last name is Her, ran an investigation, interviewed Biden
Mm-hmm.
because of the documents he had. And I won't get into that, but basically they released the audio just a week or two ago.
Yeah.
And if you hear the audio, I don't know if you've heard it yet, dude,
I heard so.
it was bad. It sounded like they were talking to a person who was in a geriatric home who had lost his mind, like, legitimately. And this was 2 to 3 years ago.
Mhm.
The fact you cover that up, that significant crime, because it is, man. That's like you're talking about someone who has their finger on the nuclear codes, I should say, and you cover that up intentionally. And so then what I think, and again, this is just a part of what the narrative. I think there's more to it. I think it's far more layered than this, but this is something I think I can like circumstantially kind of prove by just talking it out. If you bring up the fact that he had cancer and that that immediately, what does that do to people? It immediately pulls your emotional strings. It's almost like, well, I can't talk about how inept and how corrupt Biden was or the fact they covered up his mental state because now he has cancer and he could die, relatively soon. So it changes the narrative and the perception of, wait a second, we now need to be more sympathetic and almost forget the fact of the crime of them concealing how significant that cover-up was of him being mentally impaired and being unable to run the country when, to your point, unelected bureaucrats, people in the deep state, people in the federal agencies were running things who were unelected. I think that is one of the main reasons it's coming out, because I don't trust in anyone. I tell this to people, like, you cannot trust the mainstream press. These people, and you kind of feel sorry for them, they have no autonomy. They're not purveyors of objective truth. They're not. They aren't. That is the truth. There's no actual like even debate of it. And if you pull back the layers and you see like they're controlled, they're being told the narrative to go with. So this whole thing of the cancer diagnosis, do I believe it's probably real? Yeah. I have some like theories that would be conspiratorial, but I'm going to refrain from that, even though I think those could be true. But I'm trying to stick to what as I said, I think I can prove. But I think the most important thing is to understand these people never do things organically and naturally. There's always an intent behind what they do. And I think if the default is, I don't believe these people, I don't believe the press, that's my default. And so then I can filter things out. And one of their main tactics they do, I believe, is they want to get us off the topic that really matters by introducing something else simultaneously to get our attention focused on that thing. And so, do I believe the cancer diagnosis is real? Probably. I think it probably is. But it just shows you how willing they are to cover their tracks and to try to get us to focus on something that is not the most important element. And I think one of the important, I'll end with this and I'll ask you another question. I think if you look at, just historically speaking, even recently, if you look at something like positive that happens, whether it's, I just will say something positive with Trump, just because he's been at the forefront of politics the last 8 years. And in many ways, what he's advocating for reflects what we advocate for because we voted for him. That just makes sense. So if anything happens from the Trump administration that's positive, you see they will immediately try to introduce something to take our attention off the positive progress and trajectory of the country. It's always the Middle East trip, for example, was a phenomenal trip, had a lot of really good things. So then all of a sudden you get Comey comes out and says something idiotic and totally reckless we talked about. And all of a sudden this thing with Biden comes out. So I just think, man, you have to know your enemy. And I hate to say that the enemy, but these people actually are the enemy of the American people because they manipulate and they do not deliver the truth accurately. So that's my hot take with that. I don't know if you want to add anything. I was going to pivot into something else.
Nope,
with that.
Just pivot.
So another thing, you mentioned our allies, and I'm always curious about this. I was thinking about this recently because we hear about the tariffs, right? And like how, like, I can't believe we're tariffing our neighbors. We're tariffing our allies. Why are we doing that? We should be wanting to take care of them. Like, why are we escalating tensions with them? And I'm thinking to myself, like, so when you think of an ally or a friend, on the global scale, like, what's your definition of an ally? Like, what should allies do? If you're an ally, what are the ingredients, so to speak, of being an ally to America?
Mm.
I'm curious. Your
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, I don't know. Mike, when I think about this, I just think about something. It's so simple, right? It's like, in the end, one of the most primary things that an ally is just somebody who keeps their word, and that's it. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, that plays out. Like, you are an ally for me in my life. One of the primary reasons I know that is because you are a man who I know keeps your word. And what I mean that is just somebody who, what I mean by that also, to kind of take it a step further, is simply somebody who does what they say they're going to do. And how that plays out, I don't know, right? Like, the nuances of what that looks like inside of an actual, geopolitical, ally relationship. What are the binding treaties that we have with each other? What are the binding relationships economically that we have with each other, which is obviously what the tariff situation is, which is, hey, this is out of balance for whatever reasons. I am not in a position to go into anything from an economic perspective, because I cannot, I couldn't hold an intelligent conversation on that in general. So, like, when I consider allies, I just consider people who are going to do what they do what they say they're going to do. They're going to have in the end, their own personal self-interest is going to outweigh their interest of the other. That's just the nature of the beast, But when it comes to allies from a geopolitical perspective, man, I don't know. I think that that's just something that's reshaping itself right now internationally. I really do. So it's kind of like, it doesn't really give a good answer to your question. I just, when it comes to allies and what they are and what they look like, and how it's, you want the relationship to be as mutually beneficial as it possibly can. And the simple fact is the United States brings a lot more to bear than most others do. So there's going to be some element of that relationship that is probably going to be out of balance in their favor, at least a little bit, just because they're just not economically in a position to bring the same level of benefit to bear. But that's like, that's general, you know what I mean? It could be, you dig into something more specific. It's like, hey, the United States may be bigger from an economic perspective. However, this ally has some sort of natural resource that we don't have that would be hugely beneficial to us in order to be able to do, manufacture something or something like that. So that one simple thing that they bring to the table balances everything else out. So I think making sure that those relationships have that element of balance to them. Now, did they prior to these tariffs? I don't know. I can't speak to that. But it certainly seems from the outside looking in that that's probably where the current administration is trying to get to, is that none of those relationships had that one thing that brings some balance to that relationship, right? It was maybe potentially all one-sided. Now, I can't say that with certainty because I don't know the details. But it certainly seems from a bird's eye view, from an uneducated person from the outside looking in, it seems like that's what they're trying to do. And I think that's only fair. That's my thoughts on that.
That's good. No, I think that's, I think that's, when you say an ally is someone you can rely on, that they will do what they say they're going to do. I think that is so foundational for a relationship. It's just always, the things I hear sometimes, like, it's so perplexing to me, because I'm talking about, like, NATO, for example. One of the things that Trump has talked about is, why are we paying a portion of our GDP into NATO when other nations aren't, and then we're supposed to defend them if they get attacked? Like, and this goes to exactly what you said. Like, if you're a friend, like, if you're our friend, then why are you not doing what you said you're going to do and pay into NATO? Pay your 3% of your GDP into NATO. You're not. So to me, I'm like, that's just an example of, well, you're actually violating a tenet of our friendship. And so, it also, the whole tariff thing, I'm like, so if a country is tariffing us at like 30% and we're tariffing them at like 5%, or we're buying tons of more goods and products from Germany, like we're buying their vehicles and they're not buying anything from us. Well, how are you treating us friendly? You're tariffing. So, like, then when we introduce more tariffs on you to equalize, or we ask you to trade to take care of the trade imbalance, it's so, and again, this goes back to this, like, you're listening to the press, when people say we're treating our friends negatively, we're treating our allies with disrespect, what have they been doing to us? Like the Europeans who are supposed to be our like most reliable neighbors have been treating us horribly. And that's, as a matter of fact, that's worse than your enemy. At least you know your enemy hates you. At least you know, whether it's Iran or China, like, okay, they don't really like you. So you expect their policies not to be very advantageous. So to me, the whole argument of like, I can't believe we're treating our allies so horribly, like, no, there just needs to be accountability. Like that's, and this is why it's so important for just people to talk about things. Like, and you mentioned like, and this goes back to the very tenet of what you said, allies, the core ingredient of friendship and being an ally is doing what you say you're going to do and being relied on in that way. That's the very antithesis of the ways these countries for decades have been treating us. And so when someone comes in and says, we're going to apply accountability, like if you're our friends, well, you need to do what you say you're going to do. That's it. That's basically, I just like it, dude, it's so mind boggling to me when I hear people talk about. And again, it just goes back to people hear this from the mainstream press, they hear this from so-called pundits, and you don't actually deconstruct what's going on and what's been happening that has led us to this point, which that's a whole other, we'll have to do a part two, because I know I'm winding down here in a few minutes, but it's just like the whole, and I'll ask you this. There's such a perspective of if you being, how do I want to word this question actually? So there's a perspective, especially with progressivism and on the left, that, if you disrupt an institution, if you somehow want to correct or reform a program that's so-called beneficial for Americans, and I think I'm thinking of like for example, you're wanting to try to rectify the fact that we have no manufacturing in this country. So we're incentivizing people to come back and to build in America so we can buy things in America instead of having to get all of our products from different countries. So therefore, there perhaps would be a brief period where we're maybe not getting as much products into this country because the objective is we're trying to have longevity, stability. And it's so easy for people to say, oh, if you do this, it's going to disrupt the economy. It's like, well, dude, we're heading down a cliff right now and you don't see it, but you're not willing to take the steps to actually correct the issue. So my question is like, what is your opinion on, and you don't have to necessarily go into the tariffs, but just the principle of not kicking the can down the road and addressing issues that have to be addressed instead of having the optics of, well, we're going to like not disrupt things because we're afraid it's going to hurt people, which is just a facade because you're actually hurting people far greater by not doing anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Your perspective on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, I think it's, leadership is influencing people, right? So the idea of influencing people to understand that there is going to be a short-term pain for a long-term gain. I think I've heard that quote referenced multiple times. It's like, as a parent, right? You see things that just as a result of knowing what you know, like there's certain things that your child's not aware of, right? And so you're going to cause them some, immediate discomfort in regards to the fact of they may want something in the immediate, but you're going to say no. They may not understand why in the moment, but in the end, they're going to, because you, in essence, know better than they do. Now, it's hard to apply that when you come to a nation state, right? Because that's very totalitarian in terms of like, hey, I understand you don't, so don't ask questions, right? That's very, that sounds very Soviet Unionish. So I want to be careful about that. But I think in not a governing perspective, but the economic perspective right now, it's the fact is, I don't, and Mike, this is just my, this is my opinion.
Your opinion. Yeah.
I don't think the American people, I don't think Americans as a culture and as a society, I don't think we have the stomach for it. I think that the moment you start to really see people start to really see that their consumer, not their, because I'm a part of this, our consumerism starts to take a hit in terms of instead of getting on Amazon and getting something in 24 hours, it's now going to be something where we have to wait 3 to 4 months before it comes in. I think that when you start impacting things like that across the board for our nation, I think that we're going to realize people probably, I don't think, have the stomach for it personally. That's my opinion. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, it depends on.
Let me say this. I think that you will see that reflected in the next election.
Yeah.
Would you agree or disagree?
Well, it depends on what type of things we're talking about. If it's like things of necessity, like, household goods, products, I don't think it's going to get to that. I mean, if it were to get to that level where like the tariffs, for example, began impacting us as consumers, not getting like our necessities from Amazon or other online outlets for 3 to 4 months. Yeah, I think if it was that extreme,
yeah,
it would definitely affect the voting populace. I think again, the way the news media has portrayed this is that it's going to take forever for manufacturing to come back to America, for us to start, getting goods. So we have to rely on China, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to have our necessities. But I just simply say that's, again, a bogus narrative. It's not true. Elon Musk legitimately, within the last 4 to 5 years, has developed rocket science that has surpassed NASA in the last 60 years. Yeah. Like, he's built an infrastructure that has surpassed our infrastructure as far as our government the last 60 years. So my thinking is, I can't flesh this out as much right now, but necessity is the mother of invention and innovation. If we need something, America is able and equipped, because we have so many natural resources, to build it quickly and disseminate it quickly. Yeah. And so there's a lie that's being disseminated around the country, I believe, that somehow we don't get our products predominantly from China or other countries, we simply won't be able to produce it. If you're like Nicaragua, if you're, a country in Central America or maybe South America, we have everything we need. And what we don't need, or what we don't have in abundance, and of course you have trading, and that's great, but we have so much stuff here that, and honestly, the manufacturing, once you kick that in, it's not going to take very long, because again, when people want it, when Americans demand it, when there's a demand and a need, I think, man, when that happens, someone comes in, a venture capitalist comes in, capitalizes it, boom, becomes a billionaire, and that is what free market capitalism is. Consumerism drives the demand, demand drives the infrastructure, and drives business, drives venture capitalists to produce that in mass. So no, I don't think it'd go that route. But let me give you the last thing, because I actually I have a crying baby, so I need to attend to that. But I want to give you the last word, John. And we'll continue, because I want to flesh out our conversation more. If you could give me, right now, May of 2025, okay, a lot of stuff's going on in our country and around the globe. What is the most important thing you want to share to just a common person? What type of response or exhortation could you give the common man, the common woman, to just to be a positive force in our country?
Yeah, well, first of all, Deidre just sent a message in the thing. So my man, and I missed that. That's a smooth lefty right there, as it were.
You call it duckhead.
Yep. Mm-hmm. No, Mike, I think the point's simple, man. Like, as we're talking about these big macro level stuff, right? You kind of think about economics, macro, micro, right? I think it's so important not to miss out on what's in front of you. It's such a simple point, right? It's just so freaking common sense. It's like, I enjoy talking about these things, right? I enjoy talking to you about geopolitical things. I enjoy talking to you about politics. I enjoy talking to you about, like, what's going on, and, these things, hey, like in Ukraine right now with the drone warfare that's taking place, literally the entire landscape of how warfare is fought is changing before our eyes. I mean, this is literally the equivalent of the Mongols bringing the composite bow and saddles on their horses and having the capacity to be able to bring and exert, like, to employ combat power in that way. So much so that, I mean, they wiped out everything, literally everything, from China all the way to Hungary. And the only reason they didn't go all the way further east is because the death of one of the Khans resulted in a Kurultai, and they all had to go back. You know what I mean? You think about the reconnaissance in force by Subutai as you went. So the reason I say all that is there's all these massive things that are going on, and they're constant, and we have so many different outlets of information, and big podcasts, and information outlets, and just, don't get so caught up in the macro that you forget that it's in the micro that we make impacts, right? And it's just, what is your community? What is the framework that you have been placed in to have influence, right? Like, I don't have influence out.
Hey, John, your audio's off. I can't hear you.
What about now?
You good?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Something popped up about hand gestures. But all that to be said, I would just encourage people to think about the micro, right? Like, take a step back. Don't be consumed by and I think the fact that these big media news outlets, the fact that they still exist, I think is very telling about how people get so caught up in the macro, right? It's like, dude, we've been talking for like 8 years about how these news organizations are completely untrustworthy. It's like, this is old news. It's like, why is this still even a topic? Like, why are people still giving these people the time of day? It's like, they're clearly liars. It's like, okay, like, what do you do with somebody who lies? You just cut them out of your life and you don't pay attention to them. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, why are they still, like, how, so all that to be said, that's representative of, don't get so caught up in the macro. Don't let yourself get stressed by it. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed by it. Take a step back, get rid of a couple social media platforms, like, stop looking at other people's lives, right? Like, the process that I had to go through to get on this call with you is crazy, because, I haven't touched, so this is, I reopened my wife's Instagram because I haven't been on social media, and I won't be on social media for the rest of my life. But, and I don't think it's bad that people are. I don't think that it's a negative thing for some people to do that. I think it's, great if it's used in moderation and wisely. And I think that you're an example of how that can be done. So it's not it's not to be demeaning in any way. And I know you got to go, so I'll wrap it up quickly. But take a step back and look at the micro, right? Like, that's where you're going to add value. That's where you're going to have impacts, right? You can't control, when it comes to corporate America, for instance, I can't change the culture of corporate America as a whole. You know what I mean? However, I'm in a management position where I have a few people that I work with and a few people that I manage. And it's like, I can value those people. The corporate world, it doesn't value anybody. It doesn't value people. It values the bottom line. People are mechanisms to ensure that they're adding value to that bottom line. If they're not doing so, then they need to be moved on. And it's like, well, that's a human being that you're talking about who has eternal value. And, even though they do need to be held accountable and do need to do the job right, that can be done in a way where they're valued, right? So all that to be said, just figuring out what your place is in the world, like understanding that you're not going to have influence across the world unless, that's something that does take place, fine. But my encouragement to people is to look at the micro, not the macro. Like, look at your family, look at your friends, look at the people that you have influence around you. How are you adding value to them? Do a book club with people and get together. And people are like, a book club, it's not stupid. Pick something that you want to read. Get a group of people together who have different worldviews. Tell people to pick a book and read a different book. And then that way you have engagement with people. And then all of a sudden, you're in a small community of 3 or 4 people inside of your community, and you have different people with different worldviews discussing something. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, holy crap. People that don't think the same can actually sit down and have a great conversation. It's like, you know what I mean? These small common sense things, they really start to take shape and add value, not when you're seeing it on these big, broad, overarching, platforms of information and communication. But it happens in the backyard around a fire when there's 4 or 5 guys who don't think the same, who are sitting around talking about a subject. So how can you add value in your community in that way? You know what I mean? Like, and it doesn't have to be like reading books or something like that. It can just be, being willing to engage and figuring out what that looks like in your small circle. And you know what? That's extremely valuable. And that's the main thing that I want to convey, is that it's not more valuable to be on the Joe Rogan podcast than it is to have a book club with 4 guys who don't think the same in your backyard. I would argue that the latter is more, I would argue that the latter is the more important. So that's all I got.
That's good, bro. I think you're spot on. And I'll let you have that last word. And I really appreciate you coming on, brother. And I actually, guys, I intentionally having to shut down because there's like 10 other things I want to talk to him about. Like I have so many things. I want to talk about Jim Comey. I want to talk about the southern border. I want to talk about the family. There's so many things. I want to talk about his, impressive beard and how he gets it to come in so smoothly and just Tom Selleck-esque. A lot of things I want to talk about, but duty calls. A crying baby calls, actually. And John has three children, and he's, I'm impressed you were able to take some time and chat with me, bro. I really appreciate it.
No, dude, it's great, man. Let them cry it out. It's good for their diaphragm.
Well,
works the core.
Maybe good for him, but then when the spouse is texting you on Instagram asking you when you're going to be done, I'm reading the tea leaves a little bit. Yes, I just got another text. So, all right. All right, bro. Thank you. Love you, bro. Let's do a part 2 soon. Can we do a part 2 soon?
It would be a privilege, old boy.
Roman handshake through the camera.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, old boy. Pleasure to speak with you again. I say, allow me to, Michael. I say, it's been.
John, I've got to go.
No, listen, young man. No one tells me when they go. Okay, old boy.
I've got to go. I love you.
Dude,
I've got to go. I've got to go.
Michael, don't you dare. Don't.